The diplomatic station floated in the darkness between stars. One stood near the large window, watching distant galaxies spin slowly in the void. His reflection stared back at him, older now, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 15 years ago. Behind him, the other humans prepared for the meeting that could change everything. "Commander Park, are you ready?" His voice cut through his thoughts. She was the chief negotiator, a woman who had learned to hide her emotions behind a mask of calm professionalism. The war had taught all of them that skill. One turned away from the window. "As ready as I'll ever be." The young communications officer looked up from her tablet. Her hands shook slightly. "The ships are arriving, 3 battle cruisers and the Queen's personal vessel." The words hung in the air. The Queen, herself, was coming. In 15 years of occupation, she had never met with human representatives directly. She ruled from her throne world, making decisions that affected billions without ever seeing their faces. "Why now?" they asked. "Why would she come here?" Straightened her formal jacket. "Because we asked for better terms. Maybe she wants to see us beg in person." One said nothing. He had been a soldier once, a good one. He had survived battles that killed everyone around him. Now he wore a diplomat's uniform, but he still felt like a soldier. Still felt like he was fighting a war they had already lost. The station's lights dimmed as the vessels approached. Through the window, one could see them. They were beautiful and terrible, ships that had burned Earth's colonies and broken humanity's fleets. Ships that had turned their world into a subject state. "They're hailing us," De said. "The Queen will meet us in Conference Hall 7 in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. One walked to the preparation room and checked his appearance one last time. The dress uniform felt wrong on him. He was used to combat gear, not this formal clothing. But this was a different kind of battle now. The other members of the delegation gathered. There were 12 humans total, all that remained of Earth's government in exile. They were scientists, diplomats, former military officers. All of them carried the weight of their dead world on their shoulders. "Remember," said quietly, "we show strength, not weakness. We negotiate from what little position we have. We ask for medical supplies, for reduced occupation forces in the southern cities, for permission to rebuild our orbital stations." "We beg," someone muttered. "We survive," corrected. "That's what humans do, we survive." The walk to Conference Hall 7 felt too short. One's heart beat faster with each step. He had faced enemy soldiers, had stared down death more times than he could count. But this was different. This was facing the being who had ordered the destruction of everything he had known. The doors opened. The conference hall was massive, designed to make humans feel small. And it worked. The ceiling stretched high above them, and the walls glowed with soft blue light. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, sat the Queen. Was tall like all her species. Her skin had a faint purple tone that shifted in the light. She wore armor that looked more like art than protection, covered in symbols that represented her conquests. Her eyes were large and dark, like pools of black water. 4 arms rested on the sides of her throne, each hand bearing rings of office. Around her stood her guards and advisors. They watched the humans with expressions that ranged from boredom to contempt. To them, humanity was just another conquered species. Nothing special, nothing important. "Approach," one of the advisors said. His voice was cold and mechanical through the translation device. The human delegation walked forward. One kept his eyes on the Queen, studying her. She looked at them the way someone might look at insects, curious perhaps, but not concerned. Bowed slightly, not too deep, not showing submission, but acknowledging the reality of their situation. "Your Majesty, we thank you for agreeing to this meeting." The Queen's expression didn't change. "You asked for an audience. I granted it. Speak." For the next hour, laid out their requests. She spoke of plague in the coastal cities, of children dying from diseases that could be cured with medicine that kept locked away. She spoke of occupation forces that brutalized civilians, of quotas that starved entire regions, of the destruction of cultural sites that meant nothing to the conquerors but everything to humanity. The Queen listened, or seemed to listen, it was hard to tell. "Your species resisted longer than most," the Queen said finally. "You destroyed 17 of our ships before we broke your fleets. You fought on your own soil for 3 years after your military collapsed. This stubbornness cost you dearly." "We defended our home," one said. The words came out before he could stop them. Every eye in the room turned to him. His face went pale. Speaking out of turn was a serious breach of protocol, but one continued. "We had no choice but to fight. You came to our system without warning. You attacked our colonies without declaring war. What else could we do?" The Queen's dark eyes fixed on him. For a moment there was something in her gaze, not anger exactly, something else, something he couldn't identify. "You could have surrendered immediately," she said. "Many species do. It saves lives." "We're not many species," one replied. "We're human." Silence filled the hall. One could feel terror, the shock, the anger of the guards, but he kept his eyes on the Queen. She stood slowly, all 4 arms moving in a gesture he didn't understand. "This meeting is concluded. We will consider your requests. You will have our answer within 3 standard cycles." The Queen turned to leave, her guards and advisors following. The humans stood frozen, unsure if they had just won a small victory or signed their own death warrants. But as the Queen reached the door, one of her advisors approached her with a data pad. One heard fragments of their conversation. "The survivors from Outpost Meridian, genetic records show." One's blood turned to ice. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Outpost Meridian, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in 15 years, a place that haunted his dreams. The Queen paused. She didn't turn around, but one saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. Then she continued walking and the doors closed behind her. "What was that?" grabbed his arm once they were alone. "You could have gotten us all killed." But one wasn't listening. He was staring at the door, his mind racing back through 15 years of memories, back to a small colony on the edge of known space, back to a wounded alien in an escape pod, back to 3 months that had changed everything. Back to the day the fleet had arrived and turned Meridian into ashes. 15 years earlier, Outpost Meridian had been a small research colony at the edge of human space. One remembered the red sun that hung in the sky, smaller than Earth's sun, but somehow brighter. He had been 27 then, a lieutenant in special forces assigned to protect a team of scientists studying alien plant life. It had been boring work, guard duty on a colony where nothing ever happened. One spent his days running training exercises and his nights reading old books on his data pad. The scientists were friendly enough, always excited about some new discovery that meant nothing to him. Doctor was the team leader, a man who could talk for hours about soil composition and photosynthesis. Ah ran the colony's day-to-day operations, making sure everyone had what they needed. There were 23 people total on Meridian, small enough that everyone knew everyone else, small enough that they felt like family. Then they found the escape pod. It had crashed in the northern valley, half buried in the mud. One and his team had been running a patrol when they picked up the distress signal. They approached carefully, weapons ready, not knowing what to expect. The being inside was dying. She was tall, with purple-toned skin that had turned pale from blood loss. 4 arms, 2 of them broken. Dark eyes that looked up at them with something that might have been fear or might have been resignation. "We need to help her," had said immediately. "She could be dangerous," one's second-in-command argued. "We don't know what species she is. We don't know why she crashed here." But one had looked into those dark eyes and seen something he recognized. He had seen it in his own mirror after bad missions, after losing men under his command. He saw someone who was trying very hard not to die. "We bring her back," he decided. "We treat her injuries. We can figure out the rest later." They carried her to the colony's medical bay, and his team worked for 16 hours straight, using every bit of medical knowledge they had. Human medicine, alien biology they had studied, and a lot of guesswork. Somehow it worked. The alien survived. When she woke up 3 days later, she couldn't speak, or wouldn't. She watched them with those dark eyes, studying everything. One stayed near the medical bay, officially as security, but really because he was curious. It took a week before she spoke. Her voice was soft, musical, but the translator device struggled with her language at first. "Why did you save me?" she asked. One looked up from his book. "Why wouldn't we?" "I am not your kind." "Neither is my friend's dog, but we'd save him too," one said. It was a weak joke, but it made her head tilt in what might have been curiosity. Over the next weeks she recovered. She walked through the colony, observing everything. She asked questions about human culture, about Earth, about why they were so far from their home world. She never talked about herself, about where she came from, or why she had been in that escape pod. "I am running," she admitted one night. One had found her standing outside, staring up at the stars. "My people want me dead." "Why?" "Because I lost a war." One understood that. He had seen soldiers broken by defeat, by failure. "What will you do?" "Survive," she said simply. "That is all anyone can do." One started teaching her about humanity. Not because anyone asked him to, but because she seemed genuinely interested. He told her about Earth's history, about the wars humanity had fought against itself, about how they had almost destroyed their own world before finally reaching for the stars. "Your species fights itself?" she asked, confused. "We used to, still do sometimes. Humans are complicated." "But you also save strangers who crash on your colony." "Yeah, we're good at holding contradictions." She learned quickly. Within a month she could speak human languages without the translator. She helped with administrative work, learning their systems. She worked in the gardens with the botanists, asking questions about Earth plants. And she watched everything. One realized she was studying them, learning about humanity in a way that went beyond casual interest. But he didn't stop her. Maybe he should have. One night, 2 months after they found her, she asked him about courage. "What makes humans brave?" she wanted to know. One thought about it. "I don't think we're braver than anyone else. We're just stubborn. When something matters to us, when someone matters to us, we don't quit, even when we should. You protect what you love, even when the cost is high." Especially then. She was quiet for a long time, then she said something strange. "Your species will face great tests. I hope you remember what makes you strong." "Are you psychic or something?" one joked. "No, but I have seen many species, none quite like yours." 3 weeks later, she told them she had to leave. She had fixed her escape pod in secret, working at night when everyone else slept. One should have been angry that she was sneaking around, but he wasn't. "Will you be safe?" he asked. "No, but I will survive. You taught me that." She reached out with one of her 4 hands and touched his shoulder. Her touch was warm. "Thank you, one, for showing me what it means to be human. I will remember your kindness. If you ever need help again." "I will not return," she said firmly. "My path leads away from here, but I promise you this, I will never forget what I learned on Meridian." She left that night. One watched her pod rise into the sky and disappear among the stars. He felt a strange sadness, like losing a friend he had just started to know. 4 days later, the sensors picked up massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Ships, dozens of them. The fleet, though they didn't know that name yet. Tried to send out a distress call, but the communications were jammed. Suggested hiding, but where could they hide? The colony was visible from orbit. Then one's personal communicator chirped. A message. sent on a tight beam that shouldn't have been possible. "Leave now. You have 2 hours, I am sorry." No signature, no explanation, but one knew that voice. He told everyone to evacuate immediately. Some argued. There was no time to explain. He started shutting down the colony's systems, grabbing what data they could carry. He ordered everyone to the emergency shuttles. "We can't just abandon," started. "Move," one shouted. "Trust me, move now." They argued. They wasted precious minutes debating. By the time one got them to understand the danger was real, the ships were entering orbit. The first shuttle launched. One watched it climb into the sky. Then the weapons fired. The shuttle exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the colony like daylight. "No," I screamed. "Grab the controls of the second shuttle. We can still." The colony's main building exploded. The shockwave threw one across the landing pad. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. Through the smoke and fire he saw trying to reach him, saw pulling at the shuttle's doors. Then the second strike hit, and there was only fire. One woke up in the emergency bunker 3 days later. Automated systems had dragged him there, sealed him in, kept him alive. Above ground, Outpost Meridian was gone, burned to nothing, every building destroyed, every person dead. He was the only survivor. Now, 15 years later, one stood in his quarters on the diplomatic station. His shoulder ached where the old scar tissue pulled tight. He rolled up his sleeve and looked at the burn mark. It was shaped like a handprint, 4 fingers. The same pattern he had seen on the Queen's lower left arm when she stood from her throne. The alien he had saved, the refugee who had learned about humanity, the being who had promised to remember their kindness. She was the Queen. She had always been the Queen. And she had ordered the destruction of Meridian, knowing exactly who lived there. The second meeting was scheduled for the next day. One didn't sleep. He sat in his quarters, staring at his hands, trying to make sense of what he knew. She had been there. She had stayed with them, learned from them, promised to remember, and then she had destroyed everything. But she had sent the warning. Those 2 hours had been meant to save them. It hadn't been enough, but she had tried. That had to mean something. Or maybe it meant nothing. Maybe he was looking for meaning where there was none. "Commander Park," this voice came through his door. "We're gathering for the morning session." "I'll be there." He looked at himself in the mirror. Same face as yesterday, same uniform, but everything felt different now. He was about to face the being who had saved his life and destroyed it in the same breath. The conference hall was smaller this time. Only the Queen and 2 advisors. Only Duh and one for the humans. A more private discussion, they had been told. Was explaining Earth's medical crisis. Something about genetic damage from the orbital bombardment during the war. Children being born with defects. Entire generations at risk. She showed data, charts, projections. The Queen listened with the same distant expression as before, like she was hearing about weather patterns, not the slow death of a species. "And what do you offer in exchange for this medical aid?" the Queen asked. "We have cultural archives," said. "Art, music, literature from thousands of years. We offer full access to Earth's historical databases. We have conquered 47 species. We have archives from all of them." The words hung in the air. 47 species, 47 worlds that had fought and lost just like Earth. How many of them still existed? How many had been reduced to museum exhibits? "Then what do you want from us?" His voice cracked slightly. "What can we possibly give you that you don't already have?" The Queen was quiet for a long moment. "That is the question." One found himself speaking without planning to. "You want to understand why we fought so hard." Every eye turned to him, looked terrified. This hand moved to her data pad, ready to record whatever happened next. But the Queen's expression changed, just slightly, just enough. "Explain," she said. One stood up slowly. You said we destroyed 17 of your ships, that we kept fighting for years after our military was gone. You've been trying to figure out why ever since, because none of your other conquered species did that. 47 species, the Queen said. Some fought longer than others, some with more skill, but you are correct. None fought with your intensity. We fight hardest when we're protecting something, one said. He was thinking of Meridian now, of trying to save the data, of pulling at the shuttle doors. Humans don't quit when the people we care about are in danger. We can't. It's not in our nature. The Queen's eyes fixed on him, really looked at him for the first time since he had entered the room. We adapt, one continued. We learn, we survive. Someone once told me that survival is all anyone can do, but humans do more than survive. We protect. We remember. We keep going even when logic says we should stop. He was using her words now. The words she had spoken 15 years ago, standing under Meridian's red sun. The Queen's hand moved slightly. One of her advisors started to speak, but she silenced him with a gesture. You speak with strange familiarity about survival, the Queen said softly. I learned from someone wise. Was staring at one like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had, but he couldn't stop now. Your Majesty, said quickly, trying to salvage the situation. Commander Park has survived many battles. He means no disrespect. I know what he means. The Queen stood suddenly. Everyone leave except the commander. Your Majesty, I don't think, one of her advisors began. Leave. The word was not loud, but it carried absolute authority. The advisors bowed and left, grabbed Dis' arm and pulled her toward the door. She gave one last worried look before the door closed behind them. Silence filled the hall. One and the Queen stood across from each other, 10 meters of empty space between them. You should not have survived Meridian, the Queen said finally. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. One's heart hammered in his chest. The bunker's automated system saved me, he said. I was lucky. There is no luck in war, only preparation and chance. She walked down from her platform slowly, each step measured. I sent a warning, 2 hours. It should have been enough for evacuation. We wasted time arguing. We didn't understand the danger. You understood. I could hear it in your voice when you ordered them to leave. She stopped walking, still 5 meters away. But they didn't listen fast enough. No, they didn't. The Queen's 4 hands clasped together in front of her, a gesture he remembered. She used to do that when thinking about difficult things. Why did you destroy the colony? One asked. You knew who lived there, you knew what they had done for you. I had no choice. There's always a choice. Not for queens. Her voice was bitter. I returned to my people after 3 months of exile. My faction had regained control, but barely. The military demanded proof of my loyalty. They demanded I lead the expansion into your sector personally. Meridian was the first human colony we encountered. So you burned it to prove yourself. I burned it to survive. If I had shown weakness, if I had hesitated, they would have killed me and destroyed it anyway. At least I could send a warning. At least I could try to save you. One felt something break inside him. Not anger, not hatred, something worse, understanding. You sacrificed 23 people to save yourself. Yes, she didn't flinch from the accusation. And I have carried their deaths every day since. I know their names. Who dreamed of creating hybrid plants that could grow on any world. Who sang old Earth songs while she worked. 21 others who showed me kindness when they had no reason to. One's throat felt tight. You remember them. I told you I would never forget. But you destroyed them anyway. Yes, the Queen's voice was steady, but something in her eyes was not. This is what it means to rule. Every decision costs someone. Every choice breaks something. I chose my survival over theirs. I chose my throne over their lives. And I have been the conqueror you see now because that is what survival demanded. She took another step forward, then another, until she stood directly in front of one. "Look at me," she commanded. One raised his eyes to meet hers. It was forbidden looking directly at a queen. It was a challenge, an insult, but she had ordered it. Their eyes met, and the queen froze. Her whole body went rigid. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin, usually faint and controlled, suddenly flared bright. Blue and purple light rippled across her face, her arms, her neck. It was like watching emotion made visible, shock written in living color. "You," she whispered, "you are him." One said nothing. He just stood there letting her see him, really see him, not Commander Park the diplomat, not the representative of a conquered species, but one, the young soldier who had saved her life, who had taught her about human stubbornness, who had watched her pod disappear into the stars and felt sad to see her go. "I didn't know," the queen said. Her voice shook. "When you spoke yesterday, something felt familiar, but I thought it was impossible. You should have died. The scans showed no survivors." "Your scans missed the emergency bunker." "I looked for survivors," she said urgently. "For 3 days after the strike, I sent drones to search the ruins. I hoped someone had made it. I prayed to gods I don't believe in that you had escaped." "Just me, only me." The queen's hand reached out, then stopped. She pulled it back. "I tried to save you all." "I know. It wasn't enough." "No, it wasn't." They stood in silence, 15 years of guilt and grief and anger flowing between them. Two people who had once shared something that crossed the boundaries of species, now facing each other across the ruins of what that connection had cost. "What happens now?" the queen asked finally. One looked at her, really looked. He saw the ruler who had conquered worlds. He saw the refugee who had learned about kindness on a small colony. He saw someone who had made terrible choices and lived with them. "Now," he said slowly, "you keep your promise." "What promise?" "You said you'd remember what you learned about humanity, that you'd never forget what it means to be human." One's voice was steady. "So prove it. Use what you learned. Change something. Make those deaths mean something more than just the price of your crown." The queen stared at him. Her bioluminescent patterns had faded back to normal, but her eyes were bright. "You ask the impossible." "That's what humans do," one said. "We ask for the impossible, and sometimes, just sometimes, we get it." The queen left without another word. One stood alone in the conference hall for a long time after she was gone. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his sides until they stopped. Burst through the door 10 minutes later. "What happened in there? We were listening on the monitors, but they went dead. Security said the queen ordered all surveillance shut down." "We talked." "About what?" One looked at her. "About choices, about the past, about what comes next." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." That night one received an encrypted message on his personal device. It contained coordinates and a time, nothing else. He knew the queen had sent it. He went alone. The meeting room was small, private, tucked away in a section of the station used for cargo storage. The queen stood by a window, her back to him. Only one guard waited outside. "You came," she said without turning. "You asked." "I commanded." "I chose," one corrected. "There's a difference." The queen turned to face him. Without her full regalia, without the throne and the court, she looked different. Smaller somehow, more like the refugee he had known. "I have a proposal," she said. "It may save your species, or it may doom us both." "I'm listening." "I want access to human military strategy. Full access. Your tactical doctrines, your training methods, your command structures. Everything that made your species fight so effectively against superior forces." One felt cold. "You want us to teach you how to fight like humans." "I want to understand it. For 15 years, my military advisors have been trying to explain your tactics. They fail. They see chaos where you see flexibility. They see recklessness where you see calculated risk. The Queen's hands gestured as she spoke. But I learned something on Meridian. I learned that human thinking is different, not inferior, different. And difference has value. Value for conquering more species. Value for survival. The Queen's voice was sharp. My empire is rotting from inside. We have been conquerors for 1,000 years. We are very good at breaking things and very bad at building them. The species we control hate us. They obey because they must, but they do not cooperate. They do not innovate. They wait for us to fall. Good, one said flatly. Perhaps, but when we fall, what rises in our place? The Queen moved closer. Civil war. Billions dead as species fight over the ruins. I have seen this pattern 47 times. Every empire we have conquered followed the same path. Expansion, stagnation, collapse, chaos. What does this have to do with humanity? Everything. The Queen's eyes were intense. Your species breaks every pattern. You adapt. You find new ways forward. You take broken things and rebuild them into something stronger. That is what I want to learn. Not how to fight like humans, but how to survive like them. One studied her face, and in exchange. Medical aid, technology transfers, reduction of occupation forces, and something more. She paused. A formal acknowledgement that Earth is not a subject world but an autonomous state within the empire. Autonomous, one's heart skipped. That's impossible. You've never granted that to any conquered species. I have never had a reason to, until now. Your court would never accept it. My court will accept what I tell them to accept. I am the Queen. But one had seen enough politics to know it wasn't that simple. How many enemies do you have? The Queen smiled, but there was no humor in it. Fewer than yesterday, more than tomorrow. Power is fluid in my court. Those who show weakness die. Those who show too much innovation also die. I must walk a very narrow path. Then why risk this? Because you asked me to. The Queen's voice was soft. You asked me to make their deaths mean something, to use what I learned. I am trying. Over the next 3 days, one met with the human delegation. The arguments were fierce. He's asking us to betray everything, Yang said. He was a general, one of the few high-ranking military officers who survived the war. He commanded resistance cells across Earth. We give them our tactics, they use them against someone else, against us if we ever rise up again. We're not rising up again, said tiredly. We barely have functioning cities. Our population is half what it was before the war. We need that medical technology or we won't have a species left to liberate. So we sell ourselves for medicine. We become collaborators. We become survivors, one said. That's what humans do. We survive long enough to find a better path. Des spoke quietly from her corner. My mother died last year from the radiation sickness. My younger brother has the genetic defects the commander mentioned. If this deal saves him, if it saves others like him, isn't that worth something? Worth betraying our own tactics, our own strategies. Worth trying something new, one said. The old path led to defeat. This path might lead somewhere different. But the arguments continued. Some saw opportunity. Some saw betrayal. Some saw their only chance at survival. Some saw collaboration with evil. One understood all of them. There was no clear right answer. There never was, not in war, not in defeat, not in the long struggle that came after. He sent a message to his sister, one on Earth. She was sick, dying slowly from the same radiation poisoning that had killed Des' mother. She had 3 children who were born with defects that shortened their lives. Her response came back 2 days later. Do what you must, we trust you. That simple trust felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Then everything changed. One was in his quarters when the alarm sounded. The station shook. Des' voice came over the communications system, high and panicked. We're under attack. Ships are firing on the Queen's vessel. One ran to the command center. The screens showed chaos. 3 warships had broken formation and were attacking the Queen's personal ship. The station's defenses were activating, but they were designed to protect against external threats, not internal conflict. "What's happening?" demanded. "Coup," one said immediately. "Someone in her court doesn't want this deal to happen." On the screen, he saw the Queen's ship trying to retreat, but the attacking vessels had it surrounded. They were being careful, he noticed, trying to disable, not destroy. They wanted to capture her, not kill her. That meant they needed her alive for legitimacy. "This isn't our fight," Yang said. "Let them kill each other." But one was already moving. "Duh, can you get me communications with the Queen's ship?" "Maybe, but why would?" "Just do it." 30 seconds later, a voice came through. One of the Queen's guards, speaking in rapid. One's translator struggled to keep up. "The Queen is trapped in the command center. Admiral's ships have disabled our engines. They're boarding now." "How many guards does she have?" 12 against 200. One looked at, "We have to help her." "Are you insane? This is internal politics. We have 6 armed guards total on this station. What are we supposed to do?" "What humans do," one said. "We adapt." He turned to Duh. "Can you access the station's systems? Environmental controls, life support, internal sensors." Duh's eyes widened. "You want to fight them using the station itself?" "Exactly." What followed was chaos. One coordinated with the Queen's guards through the communication link. Locked bulkheads, vented atmosphere in boarding corridors, created false sensor readings that made small groups of defenders look like large forces. Yang, despite his protests, helped organize the human security forces into a defensive line around the conference halls. It was guerrilla warfare, the kind humans had learned during the occupation. Use the terrain, make the enemy uncertain, create chaos and opportunity. The coup forces were stronger, but they expected a traditional fight. They didn't expect environmental systems to turn against them. They didn't expect doors to seal at random. They didn't expect the station itself to become a weapon. One found himself fighting in the corridors near the Queen's docking port. A soldier came around the corner, weapon raised. One was faster. Training from 15 years ago took over. He disarmed the soldier and kept moving. He reached the Queen's ship just as her guards were making their last stand. The coup forces had them surrounded. The Queen stood in the center, all 4 arms holding weapons, her face calm even facing death. Then the lights went out. They had cut power to that entire section. In the darkness, one's voice rang out. "This way, follow my beacon." He had a glow stick, ridiculous and low-tech, and impossible to jam with electronics. The Queen and her guards followed the light. They ran through corridors one had memorized, through passages Duh unlocked ahead of them and sealed behind them. They made it to a secure room just as power came back online. The Queen was breathing hard, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with stress and adrenaline. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you save me?" One looked at her. "Because you asked me to make those deaths mean something. I can't do that if you're dead." Outside, they could hear the coup forces regrouping. Yang's voice came over the communicator. "They're pulling back. The main fleet is arriving. It's over." It took 6 hours to secure the station fully. Admiral was captured alive. The coup had failed, but barely. The Queen's position was weakened, her authority questioned. When she finally had a moment to speak with the human delegation, she looked exhausted. "You saved my life," she said. "You tried to save mine once," one replied. "I guess we're even now." "Even?" The Queen repeated the word like it was foreign. "I do not think it works that way." "Maybe not, but it's a start." 6 months passed before the Queen summoned them again. 6 months of uncertainty, of rumors, of hope and fear mixed together until they were impossible to separate. One spent that time on Earth. watching his sister slowly recover with the medical supplies the queen had sent as a gesture of good faith, watching children like this brother receive treatments that actually worked. But they all knew the real decision was still coming. When the summons arrived, it came with enough transport ships to carry the entire human delegation and then some. They traveled for 3 weeks through space, seeing worlds that had been conquered centuries ago. Some looked prosperous, others looked like prisons with cities built on top. The Queen's throne world was a planet of massive towers and ancient architecture. Everything spoke of power, of permanence, of an empire that had lasted 1,000 years and intended to last 1,000 more. One stood in the grand hall with the other humans. Around them, nobles filled the seats in a rising amphitheater. Thousands of them, all dressed in their finest, all watching with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt. The queen sat on her throne at the center, elevated above everyone else. She wore full ceremonial armor, covered in symbols of her conquests. She looked every bit the ruler of an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds. But when her eyes met one's across the distance, he saw something else. He saw the refugee who had crashed on Meridian. He saw the being who had learned about human stubbornness and kindness. He saw someone who was about to take a risk that might cost her everything. The queen stood. The hall fell silent instantly. "For 1,000 years," she began, her voice carrying through the enormous space, "the Imperium has expanded. We have brought order to chaos. We have conquered 47 species and integrated them into our empire. We have created the largest unified civilization in this region of space." Murmurs of agreement from the assembled nobles, pride in their accomplishments, but one heard something else in the queen's voice. A but was coming. "But," the queen continued, and the hall went silent again, "expansion without evolution leads to stagnation. Order without adaptation leads to brittleness. We have been so focused on conquest that we have forgotten how to grow in other ways." A noble in the front row spoke up. "Your Majesty, what are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that we learn from those we have conquered." The queen's 4 hands gestured to the human delegation. "Humanity, the 48th species to fall to our forces. They fought us for 7 years with inferior technology. They destroyed 17 of our warships. They refused to surrender even when their world burned." "They were desperate and foolish," another noble called out. "They were adaptive and creative," the queen corrected. "Qualities that have value. Qualities we have suppressed in the species we control because we see flexibility as weakness and creativity as threat." The hall erupted in angry voices. One could see this was going badly. The nobles were not ready for this message. They had built their entire identity on being superior, on being conquerors. Admitting they could learn from the conquered was admitting they were not perfect. But the queen raised her hand and silence fell again. When she spoke, her voice was cold and absolute. "Admiral attempted a coup against my rule 6 months ago. He did so because he saw my interest in human tactics as weakness. He believed that learning from them made me unfit to rule." She paused, letting that sink in. "He was wrong, and he is dead. Let that be a lesson to anyone else who confuses adaptation with weakness." The threat was clear, but the queen continued in a different tone. "I propose something unprecedented. Earth will become the first allied sovereign state within our empire, not a subject world, not a conquered species kept in chains. An ally, a partner. They will retain autonomy over their internal affairs. They will contribute to the empire not through forced labor or tribute, but through knowledge exchange and mutual benefit." The hall exploded. Nobles shouted over each other, some in fury, some in shock, a few in what might have been thoughtful consideration. One felt grip his arm. "She's actually doing it," she whispered. "She's actually trying." But a powerful-looking noble stood up, and the others fell quiet out of respect. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if we grant humanity this status, What prevents every other conquered species from demanding the same? What prevents the collapse of the very structure that holds our empire together? It was a good question, a smart question, and one could see the Queen had been waiting for it. Let them demand it, the Queen said simply. Let them prove they have something to offer beyond their submission. Let them show us what makes their species unique, what knowledge they have that we lack. And if they can demonstrate value, then yes, we should consider it. That's chaos, someone shouted. That's the end of order. That's evolution, the Queen countered. That's growth. That's how civilizations survive when the universe changes around them. She looked directly at the noble who had asked the question. You speak of the structure holding our empire together. I ask you this. What holds it together now? Fear, the threat of force. Is that structure? Or is that a prison we have built for ourselves? The Queen turned to address the entire assembly. I have studied the rise and fall of civilizations across the galaxy. Every empire follows the same pattern. Expansion, stagnation, collapse. We are stagnating. We conquer, but we do not grow. We control, but we do not create. We enforce order, but we crush innovation. How long before we follow the same path as every empire before us? Silence. Real silence this time. Not the forced quiet of obedience, but the uncertain quiet of minds being changed. Humanity offers us a different path, the Queen said. They will teach us their methods of warfare, yes, but more than that, they will show us their methods of adaptation, of rebuilding from destruction, of finding strength in cooperation rather than domination, and in exchange, they receive the first step toward freedom. She sat back down on her throne. This is my decision. You may debate it. You may rage against it, but it will stand. Earth is now an allied sovereign state. Let any who wish to challenge this come forward. No one moved. The threat from Admiral's failed coup still hung over them all. The Queen had survived that challenge and emerged stronger. No one wanted to be next. But then slowly something unexpected happened. A few nobles, younger ones mostly, began to stand. Not in challenge, but in acceptance. Then a few more. It spread through the hall like a wave, not universal but significant. Agreement, or at least acknowledgement that change was coming whether they liked it or not. One felt something break inside him. Not break like shattering. Break like dawn breaking, like winter breaking. Like a wall finally coming down after years of pressure. They had done it. Somehow, impossibly, they had done it. After the formal ceremony, after the documents were signed and the protocols observed, the Queen granted one a private audience. They stood in a garden on the palace grounds, real plants from dozens of worlds, carefully maintained. It reminded him of Meridian, of the colony gardens where the Queen had worked alongside human botanists. You kept your promise, one said. I tried to. The Queen touched a plant from her fingers gentle. This is just the beginning. The resistance within my court is strong. Some will never accept this change. Change is always resisted. Yes, she looked at him, and I may not survive to see it through. If they kill me, if another coup succeeds, this agreement may not last. Then we'll make sure you survive, one said. Humans are good at protecting what matters to us. I am not asking for protection. I know, but you're getting it anyway. That's what partners do. The Queen was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into a pocket of her armor and pulled out a small data chip. This contains the complete records from Outpost Meridian, she said, placing it in one's hand. Everything. The scientists' research, Oz daily logs, plant studies, communications, personal files. I saved what I could before ordering the strike. One stared at the chip in his palm. Why? Because I told you I would never forget. Because they deserve to be remembered. Because, her voice caught, because I owed them that much. One closed his hand around the chip. Thank you. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't bring them back. No, but it means they're not forgotten. That matters. They stood together in the garden as an alien sun set in the sky. Two people from different worlds, different species, different experiences, connected by a brief moment of kindness 15 years ago on a small colony that no longer existed. "What will you do now?" the Queen asked. "Go home, help rebuild, make sure this partnership actually works. And in the future." One thought about it. Teach, maybe. There's talk of creating a joint academy, human and students learning together. Someone needs to show them that different species can understand each other. "You would be good at that." "I learned from the best teacher." The Queen's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what he had learned was her version of a smile. "I learned from you first." 10 years later, Commander One Park stood in the assembly hall of the Human Cooperative Academy. Before him sat 300 students, half human, half all young, all eager to learn. On Earth, his sister One ran medical exchange programs. Her children were healthy, thriving, working in fields that hadn't existed before the partnership. They commanded the first joint exploration vessel, pushing into unknown space with a mixed crew that represented the best of both species. Yang still commanded resistance cells, but now they fought for different things. Not against occupation, but for better implementation of the alliance. For justice within the new system. For keeping everyone honest. Served as Earth's first ambassador to the court. Negotiating, arguing, building relationships one conversation at a time. And the Queen ruled from her throne, facing threats both internal and external, but no longer alone. She had allies now, partners, species that had been conquered learning to become collaborators. It was slow. It was difficult, but it was happening. The galaxy was changing, not because of conquest, not because of force, but because two people had shared a moment of kindness 15 years ago, and both had been stubborn enough, human enough, to believe that moment could mean something more. In her private chambers on the throne world, the Queen kept a small flag from Outpost Meridian. It was burned at the edges, damaged by the fire that had destroyed the colony, but the colors were still visible, still bright. She would look at it sometimes when the weight of rule became too heavy. She would remember a young soldier who had taught her about human stubbornness, about protecting what mattered, about never giving up. And she would remember her promise. "I will never forget what I learned on Meridian." She had kept that promise, and it had changed everything. In the academy, One finished his lecture on cross-species communication. A student raised one of her 4 hands. "Professor Park, is it true you once met the Queen before the alliance?" One smiled. "Yes, a long time ago." "What was she like?" He thought about that. About the refugee in the escape pod, about the conqueror on the throne, about the being who had tried to save them and failed, but who had never stopped trying to make it mean something. "She was someone who learned to survive," One said. "And then she learned to do more than survive. She learned to hope. That's the most human thing anyone can do." The students didn't fully understand, but someday they would. Someday they would face their own impossible choices, their own moments where survival wasn't enough, where you had to risk everything for the possibility of something better. And when that happened, maybe they would remember this lesson. Maybe they would remember that change was possible, that enemies could become partners, that even the worst moments could become the foundation for something new. That was the future, not perfect, not easy, but possible. And for humans, possibility was always enough to keep fighting for.